Vietnam's mysterious war. This program is a special one-hour preview of the series Vietnam, the 10,000-day war.
Be careful, though. If there are 30 of them out there and you make contact, you'll have a fight on your hands, brother.
Drop back about 5 meters. 5 meters.
(1945). Vietnamese nationalists declare independence from France. Their leader, Ho Chi Minh, is a charismatic and gifted communist. The U.S. supported Ho, but France reoccupies Vietnam, which it first colonized 80 years earlier. In 9 years of bitter struggle, Ho's guerrilla forces wear down the French. 1954, 10,000 French troops surrender at the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Vietnam is partitioned. The U.S. now sees a communist North Vietnam as a Soviet-Chinese gateway to Asia. South Vietnam is particularly vulnerable. Ho Chi Minh has vowed to unify the two Vietnams. President Eisenhower declares South Vietnam vital to Western security. His successor, John F. Kennedy, agrees to commit U.S. resources.
There's a long history of our effort to prevent Vietnam from falling under the control of the communists. That is what we are now attempting to do, and as the war has increased in scope, our assistance has increased as a result of the requests of the government.
Late 1962, guerrilla activity and control spread across half the country. With the Saigon government imperiled, President Kennedy eventually commits 25,000 military advisors. Their mission is to lead Saigon's troops, but Americans are increasingly drawn into combat. Despite this aid, America's ally proves no match for the guerrillas. The rebellion is led by 8,000 southern-born communists who infiltrate from North Vietnam. In 1963, the guerrillas totaled 35,000. They call themselves the National Liberation Front. The Americans call them the Viet Cong or Vietnamese Communists. South Vietnam's first president, Ngo Dinh Diem, is an ardent nationalist. But he is an autocrat and a devout Catholic in a nation of Buddhists. In 1963, 7 Buddhist monks commit suicide to protest Diem's oppressive rule. These human tortures begin a decade of political crisis. Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge.
That horrified President Kennedy. I remember going into the Oval Room, and there was the picture of this old man sitting cross-legged, burning himself alive. And President Kennedy said, look at that. Look at what things have come to.
William Colby, the CIA intelligence chief in Saigon, supports Diem. Some advisors want to change the Saigon government.
That period of 1963 was one of the most agonizing and intense periods of debate that I've ever experienced inside our government. There was a very intense division of opinion in the government.
Diem's senior generals make it known they will stage a coup if the U.S. supports them. In Washington, Secretary of State Dean Rusk passes the decision to Ambassador Lodge in Saigon. Lodge informs CIA agent Lucien Conin.
My instructions were that I was to inform General Min that the United States government would not thwart their coup. And I conveyed this.
November 1st, 1963. The generals move against Diem. Diem's palace guard fights back. But by next morning, Diem and his brother Nhu are dead, murdered as they surrender. Kennedy is distraught.
When the cable came in, as I recall, it was brought in to him from the outside by one of his aides and put in front of him, and he read it. And there was a deep silence around the table, and the president was obviously shaken by this, sprang to his feet and walked out of the room saying nothing to anybody.
Kennedy himself is assassinated 3 weeks later. Some historians say Kennedy planned to withdraw U.S. advisors from Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson, who retains Kennedy's senior advisors, gets conflicting advice. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara advocates a tough stand in Vietnam.
Our response will depend upon the action of the aggressors, in this case, the North Vietnamese. The key to the situation remains the cessation of infiltration from the north into the south.
Infiltration from North Vietnam into the south is along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The trail is a 1,500-mile system of jungle and mountain paths crisscrossing Vietnam's borders. 1964, Hanoi increases infiltration. Johnson responds. He sends its military chief to direct field policy. General Maxwell D. Taylor becomes ambassador.
Very soon I got there and started dealing with the first government, and that was the government of General Kahn. In the course of my ambassadorship, which had been agreed to last just 1 year, I dealt with 5 governments. In other words, the house was cleaned and turned over 5 different times with a chaos that one can imagine. And it was perfectly apparent that we were going downhill on a losing course. If we didn't change that course, we'd better change our objective, or we'd better find additional assets to use.
August 4th, 64, a fateful date. 2 U.S. destroyers patrol off North Vietnam's coast in the Gulf of Tonkin. South Vietnamese commandos have been attacking this coast for weeks. Now the 2 U.S. destroyers come under attack. President Johnson retaliates. He approves the first airstrikes against the North. August 5th. The bombers are in the air as Johnson informs the public. Hit oil and supply depots near the border. After the bombing, Johnson asks for congressional approval. This gives the president authorization to conduct war without declaring it. The so-called Gulf of Tonkin resolution is passed overwhelmingly by Congress. Senator William Fulbright.
He sold it as a means to prevent any widening of the war, as I believe the language he used to use, that we were going to face this little country, as he said, I think 17 million people. And with the great might of the United States, they would clearly be inclined to settle and to compromise and have a peaceful settlement, and that there wouldn't be any war.
North Vietnam is now intermittently bombed. Johnson believes this strategy may end the war within 6 months. He sends warnings to North Vietnam's Prime Minister, Pham Van Dong. They are ignored. The Pentagon tells Johnson that North Vietnam's resolve is stiffening. The North Vietnamese people accept enormous sacrifice. Entire communities live underground to escape the bombing. Hanoi has a single-minded leadership dedicated to a unified and communist Vietnam. The Soviet-supplied war is presented as a crusade for independence. Hanoi diplomat Ha Van Lao on the bombing.
Naturally, it was terrifying, but you know our people. We have the ability to overcome difficulties. We had to, in order to adapt ourselves to a life of war. Because without that, we would have been beaten. We would have lost the war.
The communists respond by taking the war to South Vietnam cities. October 1964. The American High Command is planning to escalate the air war against the North, but guerrilla attacks threaten the main air bases in the South. Again, Johnson gets conflicting advice. The CIA's William Colby.
As the tension level grew in Vietnam, the tendency was to strengthen the military forces against the prospect of an attack by North Vietnam. Now here I think the Americans made a fundamental error that pursued us all the way through Vietnam, because we said that if there's a war going on, it must be an affair for soldiers. And we consequently thought of building up the military response to a war.
President Johnson takes the most crucial decision of the entire war, to send combat troops. March 8, 1965. 3,500 Marines land at Da Nang. The announced mission is to defend the airbase, but within a month, the Pentagon is processing requests for 90,000 combat troops. For Field Commander General William Westmoreland, the landing of troops represents a personal victory.
Our mission was to protect South Vietnam from being overwhelmed by the aggressive forces from the north. And I was told by Mr. McNamara on innumerable occasions, that I should ask for the troops I felt needed to bring about that end result.
But then the tracks we found in the stream indicate that there was somebody going down this way in the stream. So maybe there's 3 of them. We'll find it. Who's that shooting? Come out! Hey, Sam, drop down a little further over there. The machine guns are going to stay in place. Stay down there around the sea.
By 1966, the U.S. has 184,000 combat troops in Vietnam. America calls its strategy limited war. It does not use its full military power. It escalates the war gradually with conventional weapons.
Get all the way down. Grenade, hit the ground. All right, that was a good one. That one was dead in there. Hey, don't throw any more grenades in there. That's enough to kill a damn horse. Yeah. Find both bodies?
North Vietnam launches total war. There is complete mobilization of manpower. All resources are directed towards survival in the north and victory in the south. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is a lifeline and a legend. Supplies are poured in at the north to emerge on the battlefields in the south. Cutting the Ho Chi Minh Trail is seen as the key to ending the war. The U.S. relies on war at a distance, applying the most concentrated airstrikes in history. Communist defenses are considered too strong to allow a ground attack. The bombing of the trail increases the cost of the air war to $1 billion a year. The Americans lose 500 planes over the trail. The American High Command claims success, but communist infiltration increases. The trail is never closed. May 1965. South Vietnam gets a new leader. Prime Minister Nguyen Cao Ky is a great admirer of America.
I think it's normal that when Vietnam, as a part of free world country, was attacked by communists, with the Chinese at that time and Russian behind them. So I think it's a duty of America to come for rescue.
After years of instability, Key's American-style politics encourages the U.S. Key's government receives massive economic aid to fight what President Johnson calls the other war. Throughout the war, the U.S. commits $7 billion in economic assistance. But many aid products reach only the black markets. There's widespread corruption among officials who resent American affluence. An officer who did official studies, Brian Jenkins.
Where the American soldier goes, so goes American culture, but in perhaps never before to the degree that was the case in Vietnam. The wealth of our country, our technology permitted us to carry this to absurd lengths. And the absurdities are numerous. the Armed Forces television station in Vietnam, broadcasting daily the weather reports of the United States.
In Big D, you long, tall Texans out there, had a cool, fair day of 68, moving down to the Swanee River to the Miami Beach area. It was a cool, fair day. Until Monday, have a pleasant evening, weather-wise, and y'all know, of course, otherwise.
Weather. A look at tomorrow's conditions today with Channel 11's Weather Girl, Bobby.
But beyond the luxury, there is real war. It is remote from the cities, but intensifying. North Vietnamese infiltration matches the American troop levels. The main U.S. field strategy under General Westmoreland is to seek battle near the border infiltration routes. The tactic known as search and destroy arouses controversy. A field commander, General Depew.
There were operations which were called search and destroy. It turns out that was an unfortunate choice of words. What it meant back in 1964, long before it became unpopular, was simply that U.S. units or Vietnamese airborne units or Marine units would patrol in the jungle, not in the cities, not in the towns, in order to try to find the main force units, search for them, find them, fight them, and destroy them. Later, I guess it became associated with pictures of troops searching villages and setting them on fire, and the word destroy became a dirty word.
The people suffer from both sides. The Viet Cong execute an estimated 37,000 villagers and officials. The South Vietnamese effort to aid and control the villages is called pacification, but the military side of it is often brutal. In this interrogation procedure, a suspected communist is slowly suffocated. A U.S. congressional study estimates civilian war deaths in South Vietnam at 430,000.
He's dropping them goose eggs like they're going out of style.
General Westmoreland.
As one who has fought in 3 wars, I can say categorically that never in the history of warfare, certainly never in the history of the use of American arms, have more attention been given to the avoidance of civilian casualties than we did in Vietnam.
The guerrillas use villages as base camps. Destroying them is necessary, according to field commanders. Critics call it counterproductive.
The thing that stands out in my mind more than anything else was I saw a woman looking at me with an expression of hate, of pure, unadulterated hate. And at that point, I knew I was in Vietnam. I never saw such hate in my life on somebody's face.
With the civilians, you know, in many areas of the An Hoa Basin, they actively operated against us. And the worst incident that my platoon went through began when an approximately 7-year-old girl lured one of my teams into an ambush, into a North Vietnamese ambush. So we had that level. We had continually to deal with civilians who were either hostile or numb.
I saw people get blown away by booby traps. Never saw a Viet Cong. Never saw my enemy. It was a hit and miss. It was like hunting a hummingbird. You'd go to one village, nothing there, another village, nothing there, nothing there. And the enemy, the hunting hummingbird we were after, was just buzzing around.
The communists rely on ambush and booby traps. 50% of American casualties come from small arms and handmade mines.
The most feared mine was the Bouncing Betty. There's a charge goes off that shoots the mine up into the air, say a yard, 2 feet high, and explodes, spraying shrapnel everywhere. It's a mine that goes after obviously the lower legs, the testicles, and maybe the lower torso. A terrible mine.
Damn snapper.
The war becomes a frustrating but deadly routine, searching the jungle for small pockets of men who are expert at ambush.
Drop, drop.
By 1968, the war draws in 500,000 American troops, and the war's progress is judged by the kill ratio, often exaggerated. The body count rises, but so does the communist infiltration rate. The U.S. tries larger and larger operations. Helicopters shape the tactics. They provide mobile firepower on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of gunships roam South Vietnam from the border mountains to the Delta rice lands. For years, the helicopter changes the nature of field warfare, but then becomes vulnerable. Toward the end, Soviet-made heat-seeking missiles decimate the gunships. During the war, the U.S. loses 5,000 helicopters. With the combat stalemate, American impatience with the South Vietnamese army becomes open and bitter. The U.S. experts privately describe Saigon's army as 80% ineffective. They call its operation search and avoid. 250,000 South Vietnamese troops die. Far more desert. The belief that South Vietnam is doing little to defend itself begins to affect GI morale.
I remember one time going into Da Nang to watch a Bob Hope show and watching all these kids on Honda motorcycles. And me seeing the day before my buddies getting blown away, of saying, hey, what the hell is happening here? This country invited me over here to fight for their democracy? What the hell's happening over here?
The Americans demand that Saigon improve its political and military performance. But the South Vietnamese complain that the U.S. directs the war by itself. Premier Key, once a great admirer of America, becomes critical.
Most of the time during the war, they were trying to do things by themselves. You know, it's very funny and also very tragic that it happened. The Vietnamese communists and the communist world always treat us as a puppet of America. But then American people themselves also consider us as a puppet of America, not a true leaders of the Vietnamese people.
At home, support for President Johnson's handling of the war is fading. Influential Senator William Fulbright turns his Foreign Affairs Committee into a forum for criticism of the war.
The president, of course, made public speeches. I was there one day out at the Armory when I wasn't any farther from here than I am to you. And that was when he used the phrase, the nervous Nellies and the sunshine patriots, and no one stand up to support the president, and everybody hoops and hollered, and you were made to look like a traitor, in effect.
Suddenly, the war seems to polarize Americans. Young people take to the streets. Men burn their draft cards. At numerous rallies, civil disobedience spreads. Diverse groups join forces in common opposition to the war. World heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali refuses his draft call-up.
I'd rather face machine gun fire before deviate from the teachings of Almighty God and the religion of Islam. I would die.
October 67. 50,000 anti-war demonstrators march on the Pentagon. A pacifist element is led by David Dellinger.
The theory was that they were bombing only steel and concrete, that it was a surgical war, that they were, maintaining humanitarian standards. When I got over there, I found out that churches, schools, hospitals, houses, entire villages were being wiped out.
North Vietnam views the battle in the streets of America as a major front of the war. Diplomat Ha Van Lao.
Nous considérons que le mouvement anti-guerre
We considered the anti-war movement in the United States to be one of the important factors which helped us to win the victory and end the war.
A leading radical, Jerry Rubin.
The only way this war is going to end is if we have war in the streets. And when people see there's going to be war in the streets of America, then they're going to stop dropping bombs on Vietnam 10,000 miles away to stop the war at home.
But the war again escalates. November '67. Johnson orders bombing to within 5 miles of Hanoi. Johnson denies press reports that the war in the South is going badly. This creates a so-called credibility gap. Johnson tries to close it.
I've had 3 meetings with Ambassador Bunker and 3 with General Westmoreland. Our American people like when we get in a contest of any kind, whether it's in a war or an election or in a football game or what it is, they want it decided and decided quickly and get in or get out, and they like for that curve to rise like this, and they like for the opposition to go down like this.
But Johnson's inner circle is split. His defense secretary, Robert McNamara, once viewed as the architect of technological war, is now described as racked with doubt. He is eased from office.
Mr. President, I cannot find words to express what lies in my heart today. And I think I'd better respond on another occasion.
North Vietnam's defense minister, Bo Nguyen Giap, is confident. He is planning a bold offensive that will shatter American hopes for winning the war. One target is the Marine base at Khe Sanh, a place in many ways like Dien Bien Phu, the scene of Giap's victory over the French 14 years earlier. January 20th, 1968. A 77-day siege begins. Then, early in the siege, General Giap launches his main plan, the Tet Offensive, timed to the Vietnamese New Year. In a spectacular raid, the guerrillas occupy the American embassy grounds in the heart of Saigon. Within hours, they are overcome, but the shock they leave is permanent. 100 cities and towns are assaulted by 80,000 guerrillas. American troops must now fight in the cities. Television flashes home the images of pain and doubt.
Awful sick of it. I'll be so glad to go home. I don't know. It's the worst area we've been in since I've been in Vietnam.
Do you think it's worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. They say we're fighting for something. I don't know.
The violence jolts America. A Viet Cong suspect is executed in cold blood. Each night on the evening news, Americans watch the casualty toll mount. Vietnam is the first war fought without news censorship. Secretary of State Dean Rusk.
This was the first struggle fought on television in everybody's living room every day. What would have happened in World War II if Guadalcanal and the Anzio beachhead and the Battle of the Bulge or the Dieppe raid were on television and the other side was not doing the same thing?
Hold us right here, please, hold us right here.
Whether ordinary people can sustain a war effort under that kind of daily hammering is a very large question.
The siege of Khe Sanh is lifted. The Tet Offensive is turned back. Despite these military successes, criticism in America intensifies.
Very profoundly. This was the turning point of the war. It could have been a turning point for success, but it was the turning point for failure.
As Tet ends, America gets a new defense secretary. Before Tet, Clark Clifford had been a supporter of the war. Johnson has commissioned him to investigate military options in Vietnam.
I finally asked the ultimate question, and that is, what is the plan for the United States to win the war? it was startling to me to find out that we had no military plan to win the war. At the end of this rather lengthy inquiry that took 3 weeks or a month, I then reported my personal views to President Johnson, and I said it was very clear to me that the one course of action that the United States should take is to get out of Vietnam. It was a real loser.
The president agrees. He announces a bombing halt and the intention to seek peace. And he acknowledges that Vietnam has destroyed his presidency. He will not seek re-election. (1969). President Richard Nixon pledges to obtain peace.
The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. This honor now beckons America, the chance to help lead the world at last out of the valley of turmoil and onto that high ground of peace that man has dreamed of since the dawn of civilization.
What do we want? Peace! When do we want it? Now! You want it? Talk up! What do we want?
Protest escalates, but the majority rally behind Nixon's stated objective of peace with honor. Defense Secretary Melvin Laird.
But the day I entered the Pentagon, I stated I'd be there for 1 day longer than 4 years, and no more. And that my objectives were to withdraw American forces from Vietnam in an honorable fashion. I made the decision, and I recommended to the Congress and to the President that we Vietnamize the war, we de-Americanize the war, that we get Americans out of Vietnam.
The new U.S. administration sells the idea to South Vietnam's president, Nguyen Van Thieu.
I think that the Vietnamization, if it's honestly done, it's fully done, it's a continuous one, it could be a way to prevent the collapse of South Vietnam.
South Vietnam begins general mobilization. September '69. North Vietnam mourns its revolutionary leader, Ho Chi Minh. Ho leaves behind a people disciplined to war and a leadership united behind his goal, one Vietnam. The North has now been at war for 24 years. Prime Minister Pham Van Dong is asked what motivates the North. Journalist Wilfred Burchett.
Why are you like you are? Why are the Vietnamese like they are? What's in you? What makes you tick? And he laughed and said, well, you know, what is our history? There's nothing else in our history except struggle. Struggle against foreign invaders, struggle against nature. And this, the result of this after 2,000 odd years, he said, is that we never panic. And whatever new situation arises, our people say, oh, well, there it goes again. But he repeated this 3 times. There's nothing else in our history except struggle.
We're also talking about a society that is enormously disciplined, a society that historically was well disciplined. And during the course of the war, every aspect of that society was geared toward fighting the war. I mean, we're not talking about a society with a free press. We're not talking about a society with open debate. We're talking about a society where the production, artistic activity was all geared toward that war effort.
North Vietnam's war machine is supported by massive aid from the socialist bloc. By 1970, communist military aid totals $4 billion. The North now slows the war in the South as U.S. troops begin to withdraw. But Hanoi builds up supply sanctuaries in neighboring Cambodia. These border sanctuaries are seen as jeopardizing the Vietnamization policy. Nixon tries secret bombing of these areas. Then, in a major escalation of the war, Nixon orders a joint American-Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. The invasion force pushes 20 miles across the border, but the communists slip away. Supplies are found, but the 2-month operation is a military disappointment. From the start of the invasion, the protest in America is bitter and bloody. Kent State University, Ohio. National Guardsmen fire into a crowd of student demonstrators, killing 4. In 1971, former State Department official Daniel Ellsberg releases the Pentagon Papers, a secret and critical analysis of the war.
I had the feeling that America was eating its young, was destroying some of its most dedicated, most patriotic, most concerned citizens, young Americans subject to the draft. And that it was up to older people like me, who had been participants, not to let that burden fall entirely on their children and on that generation.
Nixon rejects the protest, saying his policy is to get concessions. Domestic advisor John Ehrlichman.
Well, his position was that he'd been elected as the individual under the constitutional system responsible for the conduct of foreign policy and the waging of war, if you please. And that foreign policy just couldn't be made in the streets.
Ray Conniff and his very famous choral group will now entertain us. And if the music is square, it's because I like it square.
But protest closes in, even at the White House.
President Nixon, stop bombing human beings, animals, and vegetation. You go to church on Sundays and pray to Jesus Christ. If Jesus Christ were here tonight, you would not dare drop another bomb. Bless the Berrigans and bless Daniel Ellsberg.
Nixon orders Foreign Policy Advisor Henry Kissinger to begin secret peace talks with the North Vietnamese. America makes a major concession. Communist troops can stay in the South, but Hanoi still insists on the removal of President Thieu. Nixon retaliates.
Bear in mind that Henry and Nixon played good guy, bad guy in these negotiations, just like a couple of cops. Henry would go to the negotiations and say, and I have this from Nixon, I know this, it was their strategy. He would say to the North Vietnamese, look, I represent this crazy fellow Nixon over there. There's no telling what he might do. I am a very reasonable man. I am a man of peace. I oppose these bombings and so on, but there's no telling what Nixon might do. So you'd better make your deal with me because I'm going to be easier to get along with than he is. And then if he got to a sticking point, he would report back and they would unleash the bombers or some kind of an offensive or something so that Henry could go back and say, see what happens when you don't make your deal with me? Then he back there in the White House does something crazy.
Okay, radios?
When the North refuses to back down, Nixon orders heavy bombing by giant B-52s. 1972 brings massive escalation. North Vietnam invades across the border. Only round-the-clock bombing turns back the ground offensive.
Setting view 090 in 1 minute.
I understand, 090.
Roger, pilot. This 3 is coming out pretty good. Roger.
Hanoi is now the new front as Nixon orders the B-52s closer and closer to the capital. The city is ringed with Soviet anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles.
Turning 090. Lead has been killed there.
Roger.
The bombing reaches the industrial suburbs. Hanoi reports heavy civilian casualties.
Stand by to release. Ready now. Bombs going.
Nixon sustains the bombing, ignoring world criticism. Nixon is anxious to force a peace agreement before the November presidential election.
Let's get post-bomb release.
In October, Hanoi settles. Its troops will remain in the south, and President Thieu will remain in power. Nixon sees the terms as honorable. A week before the election, Kissinger announces peace is at hand. Nixon is re-elected by the greatest number of popular votes in American history. There is one major snag. Kissinger has failed to convince Thieu to go along. On a hurried visit to Saigon, he tells Thieu to accept or face a cutoff in aid. Thieu says he cannot accept the North's troops in the South.
I am not a yes man. I am not a puppet. I am not agree with everything the American would like to impose to our people.
Hanoi now stalls as well. Nixon responds with maximum force. The B-52 strikes central Hanoi for the first time. The bombing lasts for 11 days over Christmas 1972. Hanoi is now willing to sign the peace treaty.
The ceasefire will take effect at 2400 Greenwich Mean Time, January 27, 1973. The United States and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam express the hope that this agreement will ensure stable peace in Vietnam and contribute to the preservation of lasting peace in Indochina and Southeast Asia.
Even as the agreement is signed, fighting continues. Thieu calls the agreement an American betrayal and predicts full-scale war. North Vietnam's peace negotiators are welcomed home as victors. Hanoi has repeated the strategy of prolonged war which tired the French 19 years earlier. America's last soldiers leave. Under the treaty, a mere 50 U.S. military advisors remain from a one-time force of over 500,000. Nixon and Thieu meet one last time. Nixon secretly pledges full U.S. retaliation if South Vietnam's existence is threatened. But Nixon himself is swept from office by the Watergate scandal. The U.S. Congress begins to cut back aid to Saigon. South Vietnam is alone. In December 1974, the communist leadership decides on a 2-year program for military victory. They assume that American bombers will not return, that the American people are tired of Vietnam. Defense Minister Jack.
Even now, if they deploy their Air Force and Navy, they will fail again. The Vietnamese people do not fear such things. It is obvious that our people, particularly our countrymen and soldiers fighting in the South, have beaten the American imperialists.
In February 1975, the Communist Armada rolls into place. 100,000 troops and heavy weaponry move along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The central region collapses in the first few days of attack. Within weeks, Hanoi's forces overrun an army that took 20 years and billions of dollars to build. Fearing a bloodbath, hundreds of civilians flee toward Saigon. Under intense pressure, Thieu resigns. He hurries into exile, bearing a lasting bitterness toward the United States.
They have abandoned. They have sold out us. They have a stab on their back, on our back. It's true. It's clear. They have betrayed.
As communist forces advance to certain victory, President Ford declares the war is over.
Today, America can regain the sense of pride that existed before Vietnam. But it cannot be achieved by refighting a war that is finished as far as America is concerned.
America's message that its Vietnam involvement is finally ended brings panic in Saigon. The early objective of safeguarding democracy in South Vietnam is reduced to the hurried evacuation of a favored few. As the Vietnam conflict ends, the majority of Americans express only relief that it is finally over. For the North Vietnamese, it has taken 30 years. Diplomat Ha Van Lao.
There were a lot of emotions at that moment. Everyone could breathe again. The war was over. Peace was established. And above all, we became the true masters of our own country, our own land, independent. Our first thoughts were of our president, Ho Chi Minh, who was not there to see with his own eyes the most glorious moment in our history.
Saigon's presidential palace, noon, April 30th, 1975. The end comes after 10,000 days.